once I found out what that actually was, I spent 4 nights not sleeping and Googling death rates on Via Ferratas.
I know. I told you I'm never going to do anything that you're going to die from. However, just because you're not going to necessarily die from something doesn't mean it still doesn't scare you to death. And today we interview Annie, who conquered one of her greatest fears on something called a Via Ferrata. What is a Via Ferrata, and why didn't our guest Annie get any sleep about it? And also, we want to find out why Annie, who has traveled all 7 continents and has adventure traveled her way around the world, why does she consider today's destination the perfect trip? This is the Active Travel Adventures podcast, and I'm your host, Kit Parks. Today we're going to go to northeast Italy to the Dolomites. It's up in the Italian Alps. I'd never even heard of the Dolomites until a girlfriend of mine, Sherry, went several years ago and loved it. I would love to have also gotten Sherry on the program, but that woman is traveling all the time, whether for work or play, and she's hard to pin down. So I was lucky to find Andy, who shared with us her experiences in the Dolomites. Annie went with Active Adventures on the Ultimate Dolomites Adventure, so that's the adventure that we're covering today, where she mostly hiked but also did a little biking and did the optional Via Ferrata. And that Via Ferrata is the cause of her multi-day insomnia. Today, Annie's going to tell us about her trip and why she chose to overcome her fear of heights by tackling that which she was most afraid. It's a great interview, and I'll see you on the other side. I do want to apologize. I had some software recording issues, but when it goes quiet, I think you can still get what Annie is saying. And remember, there's a complete transcript at activetraveladventures.com if you want to get the exact wording. Here's my interview with Annie. Could you start by just introducing yourself and tell us maybe your age and just a little bit about yourself?
My name is Annie Allen. I'm 55 years old. I have 2 grown daughters, and I started doing adventure traveling only about 8.5 years ago, once my girls graduated from high school and went off to college. And my first trip was Active Adventures. I went to New Zealand for 3 weeks. It said you needed a pair of well-worn hiking boots, and I bought a pair and walked around the block, and I haven't stopped since.
And what made you decide that you wanted to experiment with adventure travel versus what I would call regular travel?
Well, I've always liked nature and things, but with my kids smaller, one of them didn't want to go, the other one didn't want to do this. It was hard to get them to participate. So, and I've always liked pushing myself physically, but it just wasn't possible raising my 2 kids. So it was like something that was delayed for a long time, and it was just waiting to come out.
And then how did you choose New Zealand? What was the thought process? Say, okay, now I've got some freedom, I got some time, I got a little money. What was in your head? How did you come about? Say, okay, New Zealand, that's the one.
Well, it's far away, and I hadn't been there, and beautiful. And I just started ticking off places that I wanted to go. And that was the first place that I decided to go to as far as adventure travel.
And then, so it sounds like you've done a lot since then. And we're going to be talking about the Dolomites today. But so you've done multiple trips since?
I'll be going on my 9th trip with Active Adventures in August, back to Nepal for the 3rd time. I was just in Antarctica in November, kayaking and exploring and looking at, visiting with the penguins and jumping in the Antarctic Ocean.
You can kayak down there? You're able to do that?
Yes. Yeah, it's amazing. You launch straight from the expedition boat and you're paddling pretty much through blue slushy.
Cool.
I would recommend it to anybody. It was actually the most beautiful place I've ever been.
Oh my gosh. I did not know you could do that because I wasn't going to think I was going to cover Antarctica. Might have to get you back on.
Oh, absolutely. It was stunning.
Yeah, very cool. So let's get back around to the Dolomites, which is our topic today. Can you tell us a little bit about what you were anticipating before you actually got to the Dolomites, and then what it looked like once you finally got there?
Well, I've been to Italy a few times, and then when Active Adventures decided to venture into the Dolomites, and I had just been to Mont Blanc the year before, circling that, and spoke with a few people that said that perhaps they would try the Dolomites next year. And I had honestly never heard of the Dolomites before. That's usually how I choose my next destination, just by talking with people. So I had no expectations. I had no idea that there was going to be such another beautiful place as this. And so it really exceeded any expectations I had because I had none.
Actually, I found that a fun way to travel myself, and I've been doing more of that recently, particularly if I'm hiring a company such as Active to do all the arrangements for me. When I don't have to worry about the logistics, it's kind of fun just to wake up each day and be surprised at what the day's going to bring.
Well, I've gone on trips like that where I didn't read the itinerary at all, but I've also gone on trips where I planned every single detail. But still, you're surprised because it's different from reading about it and then to be there in person.
So give us a brief overview of the trip, of what you did.
Well, started in Venice in Italy, and the history, the crowds, the whole ambiance of Venice, and then we got on the bus and started leaving civilization and sort of going up into the mountains and just turning into this spectacular, incredible, beautiful place where you feel like you're on The Sound of Music or something. And within maybe 2 hours, I believe it was, you're in a completely different location. So it was really spectacular. It was good to get away from Venice. So I'm not really a crowds. I mean, I like history and everything, but I prefer to be in nature. So within a few hours, we're on top of a mountain.
Very cool. From the photos, because I've not been to the Dolomites myself, they look different than what I consider a normal looking mountain. Could you describe them for us?
I believe that they're made out of coral. So the thing is, coral has these properties that are healing and just makes you feel good. So just by what the mountains are made out of makes you even feel better being there. Supposedly, it worked for me. I don't know.
When we finished our interview, I decided I better do some research into what exactly this funny limestone in the Dolomites is. And it turns out that Annie is correct. It is from the coral reefs. And how they came about discovering what on earth this was and what made these mountains so unusual came about in the late 1800s. A geologist or naturalist published an article saying about this peculiar limestone he found in the Alps. And unlike typical limestone, the rock in the Dolomites does not react with acids. And this was a big geological mystery for a good 100 years. And even though the fossils gave clues that there were rocks that had come from rocks and sediments from the sea, at that time the scientists really knew nothing about the bottom of the sea, so they were kind of perplexed. Then in 1770, the famous explorer James Cook, who coincidentally is an ancestor of my late husband, ran aground on the Great Barrier Reef and discovered these massive mountains of limestone underneath the water. But he was unclear as to how they were formed. And then if you remember our good friend Charles Darwin from the Galapagos episode, he was working on trying to figure out what the heck how these atolls were forming in the Galapagos Islands and all that. And he'd read about James Cook's discovery, and he was fascinated by it. And then he started putting together some of the research and his theories that he was forming with these islands that he was seeing off the coast of Ecuador and Chile, and thought that maybe some violent weather reactions, like he was there for an earthquake and he saw how the land had shifted several meters. He said perhaps with these massive weather or catastrophic events that the land was able to shift up or down over time. And so he put forth this theory, and it stayed out there for a while until an Austrian geologist, Baron Richthofen, I'm sure I mispronounced that again, he suggested that the mountain peaks themselves were actually the remains of those coral reefs, based on the theories that he had first obtained from Charles Darwin. And that theory was considered so revolutionary that the regular publishers wouldn't publish it, so he had to go and privately publish it, and eventually it was proven to be true, that the mountains that Annie hiked were actually the remnants of the corals from the sea. Fascinating. So let's get back to your trip. I saw that you had to take some cable cars or cable car. Tell us about that.
Oh, well, we were on several cable cars, but the one thing that I did on the trip was the Via Ferrata. And that is offered on the trip, but it's just in passing. And I had never heard of a Via Ferrata before. And once I found out that we would be in harnesses and climbing pretty much straight up the face of a mountain via a fixed cable, I have a fear. Well, I've overcome it, but I had a real fear of heights, and it took me a lot of self-negotiating to do it. It's not easy in any stretch of the word. It was one of the hardest things I've done, but I did it. It is an option on the trip. You don't have to do it, but you really should think about what it means before you do it.
Yes, that's what I was talking about. So that's what Via Ferrata means?
It means like via Ferrata, I think it means like iron or something. The cable.
Oh, Ferrata's like the harness or something,
the Ferrata
perhaps.
is the cable, yeah.
Ah, gotcha. All right. Okay. Ferrata, I had no idea what that meant. So I said Cincturi or something like that.
Right,
Okay.
so you're going up the side of a mountain and you get spectacular. And once you get down, it's quite a sense of accomplishment. Well, for me anyway, since I had such a fear of heights, but it's not easy. And you're climbing straight up the side of a mountain. You are locked in with a harness, but you have to have a good deal of agility and, well, agility and good cardio, I would think, and, not be afraid. So.
Well, with your fear of heights, then what would possess you to say, okay, I'm going to do that?
Oh, once I found out what that actually was, I spent 4 nights not sleeping and Googling death rates on Via Ferratas and what exactly it meant, and texting back to the States with my family and friends saying, should I do this or not? And everyone, you don't have to do it. But my motto is to face my fears and do anything that really scares me, because otherwise, every time I give into, or anybody gives into their fears, it lessens your range, and it just gets smaller and smaller. So the more I'm afraid of something within reason, if it, the more I'm going to do it.
So if you determine something is just a fear in your head rather than a fear that you should be afraid of, you go and push yourself to do it?
Right. Right. Yes. Because I found that there were very few, if any, deaths on Via Ferratas. And and I met some really great people on the trip, and they were very encouraging. And our guides were very encouraging. So it was a great experience. And there weren't that many people of our group that actually chose to do it. So I was very proud of myself for actually doing it. And I was reduced to absolute tears before, putting my first step onto the face of the mountain and starting climbing. But once you start climbing, you can't think of being afraid. You just have to think of where your feet and your hands are going. Anyway, I was proud of myself.
And then how did you feel once you'd done it?
There's a photo of me skipping with my poles after that. And it's so exhilarating. It's like a high to do something that you've been afraid of and actually survive. And yeah, it's quite exhilarating. So, and it's bonding too with the people that you do it with.
I find adventure travel in general, you tend to bond with the people really quickly and rather deeply. What is your experience with that?
Well, there is a certain type of person that you will meet that does adventure travel, that goes off the grid, that takes chances and like you said, doesn't want to just sit around on the beach with a drink or shopping in a city. So it's a certain type of person. And I feel that we are just more adventurous and more open to new experiences, maybe. So quicker to meet people because we bond over stories, experiences, just the sense of adventure. Like I said, just doing something that might be a little scary or out of your comfort zone with somebody that you never met before, you instantly bond with them. So.
I like too what you said earlier about how you learn about future trips by the people that you meet and tell you about things. That's generally speaking how I get my next trip.
Oh, right.
Either somebody says, I meet somebody on one trip, they said, oh, we're going so-and-so, you want to come? Sure. And that's how I'm going to Bhutan next week.
That's how I've been traveling since I was a teenager, actually. But I will admit there's a lot of places that I've never heard of, and then it's just mentioned in passing, and I'll be like, yeah, I'm there next, sign me up.
My motto is always try to say yes, no matter what, and generally speaking, it hasn't let me down. On a physical rating, how hard was this trip?
So I've done things like summited Kilimanjaro, reached Everest Base Camp, summited Mount Whitney. Those were extremely physically demanding. And even Mont Blanc at some days was really pretty hard. But the nice thing about this Dolomite trip was it was the perfect amount of physical exertion. It was never to the point, and I'm a crier, Some days when I've been on certain trips and it's just pushing me beyond my limits, I'll cry, but it's okay. But the Dolomites was never reached that point. It was always like, oh, I'm getting tired, and we would be done. I think the most that we would do was maybe 9 miles. And for me, that wasn't, that was just perfect. And it was never like super a lot of altitude change. And the views and the location were just stunning. So I never reached a point of being exhausted. It was perfect. And at the end of any day, we had the most comfortable beds to sleep in, the most amazing food to eat. So all in all, there was nothing, there was no negative part of this trip really.
Very cool. Now, does this also include a homestay, or because active usually tends to mix things up a little bit, so you're not always hiking? What other activities did you do?
Well, not homestay, but we would stay like when we were in the nature park, we would stay in refugios, which are little, well, they're like little, I would say hostels or something, where you're provided with a room. Depending, sometimes they're like group rooms and food and things like that. So we would stay at those type of places. But what else we did was one day we did a bike ride on an old train track, well, the pathway where the train had been. And it was so much fun because we rode our bikes through the old train tunnels and going downhill into a tunnel that was pitch black and not being able to see your feet or the ground and just trusting that, everything was going to be okay was so much fun. It was just like you were flying through the tunnel. So that was one thing we did, was the bike ride. Another thing we did was we got to, and this is another bit of history I'd never heard of, was exploring these tunnels that were created in the mountains where the two sides had dug this whole maze of tunnels high up in the mountains, and they were fighting each other across these valleys. And we got to go down into these tunnels. It was really kind of mind-boggling that people lived in there and fought in there for such a long period of time, and even actually that they even made these. So the tunnels were, I'm tall, so I had to scrunch down the whole time, and you wear a helmet and it's dripping water inside. But you see where these people lived for long periods of time, and they were fighting, and how they even thought to dig these tunnels and how long it took. It's just incredible. And the views when you can peek out from a hole are just stunning. It's quite a bit of interesting history that I'd never heard of before. So.
Annie, you're so well traveled. How high up the list would the landscape of the Dolomites be compared to the other places you've been?
It's very, very high because there was just no downside, no downside. It was just idyllic. The one place, what's it called? Trechime, with the three tall peaks. It's just mind-boggling. You're just staring and looking and looking, and I'd be hiking and like turning around, not wanting to miss a moment of the views. And every place we went was just, 360 degrees, just clean and crisp and just beautiful. Really, really beautiful. No downsides. So,
what month of the year did you go?
I went in September.
In September. Would that be a good time of year to go?
Well, it worked great for me. So I don't believe we had any bad weather at all. No, I don't think we did. And honestly, a little rain on a hike, I actually like that. Maybe one day was a little overcast, but it was a beautiful time to go. I'm sure there's other times too, and you never know about the weather, but it was a perfect time.
Is it something you need to be prepared for cold? I'm not sure how high up you are.
Pack in layers, but I was never particularly cold. And the lodging was just so cozy with down comforters and warm. It was just warm and welcoming. There were no downsides. I was never cold at night. I mean, I've slept where freezing in a tent on the side of a mountain or something. And it was all about comfort and just the right amount of physical activity and fantastic food, at least 3 times, sometimes 4 times a day if we stop for coffee. So it was fantastic. Yeah.
Nice, nice. So the comfort rating's pretty high, but on a scale of 1 to 5, how would you put the difficulty rating? Where number 5 would be comparable to, say, the Mont Blanc, and number 1 being a couch potato?
Maybe 3.5.
What kind of preparation would you recommend people do, or did you do as far as any training?
I'm training constantly because I'm always looking ahead to my next adventure. So, and I'm fortunate to live next to a small mountain, 3,800 feet elevation. So I'm going up and down that thing all the time. So, the normal amount of training, the more you get out, the more you hike and train, the better, the easier it is. Everybody has their own training levels and training abilities of where they can go. But I'm always training.
That's great, Annie. That also allows you to be spontaneous if a sudden opportunity arises. I also find that the more I train, the better time I have.
Right. So that's never been an issue. I mean, to me, this was easy compared to other things that I've done. So, yeah.
Right. It lets your body do its job during the day. So at the end of the day, you're not dead. Tell us a little bit about the composition of your group. Like maybe their ages, or are they from around the world, or just a little bit so people get an idea?
Let's see. They were mostly American, and they were all people that had gone on at least one or more trips with Active Adventures before.
That's right. You were on the inaugural trip.
Yeah, we were the inaugural group. Yeah, so they weren't young. There might have been a couple of people that were younger, but they were an age, I would say, 30 to probably 70. Yeah, so all ages in that aspect. And sometimes you could be surprised. Like one of the guys in the trip, he looked out of shape. He got a belly and everything, and looked like he was a couch potato, but turns out he was an expert mountain climber. So, and he was one of the very encouraging people on the Via Ferrata. And I don't know that I would have been able to do so well if he hadn't have been behind me telling me where to put my foot and things like that. But so you can never judge a book by its cover as far as physical abilities for people.
Too funny. So what's on the plate for future adventure travels?
Well, I'm going on a hike in the John Muir natural, I don't know what it's called. It's below Yosemite, above lakes in June. It's somebody else has put together this group. It's called Hell for Sure. I'm just trying to keep pushing myself as far as I can. And it's going to be 4 days, 45 miles. And we'll be summiting 2 12,000-foot peaks. And it's a lot of like hand over foot scrambling, carrying my own pack, sleeping in a tent and that sort of thing. And if we have anything left at the end of that, we get to go 2 more days.
Now, are you going to be on the John Muir Trail itself, or you have to get the permit, or are you doing something nearby?
Nearby. So this guy who runs this company is called TSX Challenge. He designed a challenge through the Sierras up to Mount Whitney, and I did that, and then a challenge in Grand Canyon. And he just designed this off-trail Hell for Sure challenge. And well, honestly, I'm getting a T-shirt out of it. So I got a T-shirt for the other 2 adventures. And then in August, I'm going back to Nepal with Active Adventures for the 3rd time. And this is going to be expedition through the Mustang region.
Okay.
And it's a very remote area near Tibet where we'll actually have a caravan. I think it's donkeys carrying our things. It's 115 miles, I think, of hiking, and very remote, a lot of time to think. There's caves that the monks carved into the side of the mountains, like maybe 1,000 years ago, lots of them. And anyways, I keep saying, I'm never going back to Nepal. And then I keep.
Well, it's funny you should say that, because I just finished an episode on Nepal that I don't think it gets released maybe this week. It's coming up soon. And it's from a woman who's been there and is going back. And I interviewed another woman who also both of these women are really well traveled like yourself, and they keep going back to Nepal. I was like, what is it about Nepal? So what is it about Nepal?
Right. But you can't say because it's not clean. It's hard. It's not comfortable. The food is not good. But I don't know. It's like the first time I did, I went Everest Base Camp, and people were like, "Are you going to go back?" I'm like, "No, no way am I going back. No." And then 6 months later, there I was. It's the energy. I can't explain it. So I was going to do the active adventures, the Lake Districts. I knew it would be comfortable. It would be, just walk in the park. But then at the last minute, I'm like, no, I have to.
And when you say the vibe, is it the vibe of the people there, or the vibe of the culture, or just the mystique of Nepal?
It's hard to explain. Certainly, the people, the children. I don't know. Maybe I'll figure it out. I'll just keep going back until I figure it out.
I'd be curious because we all have limited time and money. It ends up being expensive to get there and all that. To keep going back there, it's got to be something's drawing people.
It's a spiritual thing, I guess, because, gosh, I mean, going back to that crying thing after I finished the Everest Base Camp, and that was 14 days of nonstop trekking. I mean, I cried for 6 hours. It was just a relief to know that I didn't have to, put my boots on the next day and keep going. But it's cleansing. It's also, to me, I like pushing myself as far as I can physically and mentally. It helps you grow, I guess, and it's good to know what you think are your limits are not necessarily your limits. I mean, I never thought that I would be able to do it 8 years ago. I never thought that I would be doing what I do now. So you never know what's around the corner. And I have my health and I am able to afford it. So I might as well do it now because you never know what's coming, right?
There's an empowerment, and I think also too on the ones where you rough it, the appreciation you feel for all the little things in life we take for granted here, and be it a shower or a bed or a pillow, or it wears off after a while, but for a good few weeks.
Or else just being able to get out of your bed and go to the bathroom, have your bathroom close by and not have to freeze
or squat, right.
And clean clothes, right? And
to drink the water out of the faucet, or it's all those little things that they all combine to make adventure travel just really special for me. I don't know that I'll do much of the regular travel until I can't do it anymore. When I'm backpacking, I'll carry along some dried out baby wipes that I'll rehydrate to clean myself, because obviously you can't shower. What's the longest you've had to go without taking a shower?
I've been on. I think the longest I went was 9 days on Kilimanjaro without any bath or shower, and I just used baby wipes every night. And so I do. It does help you to appreciate greatly what we have, and then also give back, to those that you meet along the way, and to help other people and see that something that doesn't mean a lot to us can mean to make a big difference in somebody else's life. So, yeah.
What advice would you give somebody? Because a lot of I do a survey, and so a lot of the listeners they want to do it, but they're a little bit scared. What advice would you give somebody that has kept themselves in decent shape, but they're afraid to pull the trigger and do something?
Well, first of all, you have to figure out what you're afraid of, right? Because really, what is there to be afraid of? And especially if you're on a tour, everything is covered. They pretty much will meet you at the airport and hold your hand the whole way. So there's literally nothing to be afraid of as far as what if you're going to get lost? No worries, because somebody's got your back the whole time. If something happened to you, well, you have to have health insurance or travel insurance the whole time, so that's fine. There's really literally nothing that could go wrong that there's not an answer to. So there's no reason to be afraid. To be afraid to be alone, that has opened up a whole new. That used to be my biggest fear, was to be alone in life. And now it's what I seek. I seek to be alone.
I'm not sure I seek it, but I've found since I lost my husband, he died 4 years ago. And so if I want to travel, I got to do it by myself because none of my friends they don't want to do what I do anyway, and they don't have the time. So I was like, well, if I'm going to go, I'm just going to go. And I'm going to dip my toes into, I like to backpack. Like I said, I'm going to go to Hungary, I believe, and they've got a long distance trail there. So I'll be backpacking in a country I cannot speak the language that most people don't speak English. That should be interesting.
Well, sometimes you just have to jump off the deep end and go. So like I said, I started 8.5 years ago with Active Adventures, and I just went on I've been all over the place hiking. And, but I was afraid to go by myself. And I would just get like pointers and think, well, okay, I can do this. And this is what, let's plan and plan. So last summer, I planned and went by myself to the Glacier National Park in Waterton National Park in Canada for 9 days. And I went completely alone. I hiked 84 miles and did something really scary, did another sort of via Ferrata cable, but I was all by myself. There was no actually hook there, just a cable. To me, it was like the culmination of all of this going by myself and pushing myself to overcome my fears of being alone and of heights and, of the unknown. And I finally did it.
And even in Glacier, Grizzly is on top of it.
Yeah, I would be out there hiking at 8:45 at night, and the signs are like, "Don't be by yourself. Don't be by yourself," especially at dawn or dusk. And I was like, well, if you resign yourself to the worst thing that can happen, which is being eaten by a grizzly bear, then there's nothing to worry about. And it was so stunningly beautiful. But after 2 days, I did get myself some bear spray, and and 5 black bears did cross my path during that period of time hiking. But I wasn't afraid. And it was so incredibly beautiful, and I was so proud of myself for doing it all by myself. And I don't know, I felt really good about myself. So,
yeah, I think that's another good part of this whole adventure travel thing, because you feel empowered, you get your confidence up. Interviewing my sister, she's like, I felt like when I got back to work, I felt like I could deal with everything. Bring it on. It's.
Oh, I have Wonder Woman painted on my garage door, and I feel, people that follow me on Instagram or that I know see at the gym, they're like, "You're an inspiration." And actually, people have started saying to me, "Oh, I'm going to do an Annie," or I know how old you are. I have this amount of years to turn into you. You're amazing. You're inspiring." And so I know several people that have actually taken the leap, done something out of their comfort zone because seen what I've done. And so that's cool, right?
Yeah, well, I'm sure you've inspired a lot of people today. So tell us about your Instagram and a little bit about that side of you.
My Instagram is Travel Annie, and I post everything about my life, which is traveling, gardening, and hiking on my mountain and my 2 daughters. So that's about it.
Very cool. You and I have a lot in common, Annie. I'm a gardener too. I used to have a plant nursery.
What?
So yeah. I bought the farm and built a nursery. So I don't do it anymore, but I did it for 14 years. It was my favorite job I ever had.
Oh, well, that's one hard thing about traveling so much, because I'm out of the country probably 3 months of the year, and is keeping my garden, so I pay somebody to come and just take pictures of flowers that I know that are going to bloom, for example. And so I don't want to miss them, and water, just care for my garden and my fish and things like that. So I have 2 sides of me. I like to be gone, but then I like to come home to.
I know exactly what you mean. And in fact, this house I'm living in right now, I've made myself not plant flowers. So I have my potted plants I've carried around for 10 or 15 years. I put them on automatic watering and hope that they make it. And so far, so good. They don't look as good as when I'm here, but at least they're alive. Is there anything that I didn't ask you that you wanted to let the audience know about your Dolomite trip?
The only thing that is that of all the places I've been, and like I said, I've explored every continent. It was the most perfect trip that I've been on because it was just a balance of physical beauty and exercise and comfort, and maybe it was because the mountains are made of coral. I don't know, but you just feel so good being there that I recommend it 100%. Active Adventures, they train their own guides. It's different. Like other companies, they might they don't necessarily. I'm sorry, I can't think of the word when like REI does it a lot, where it's not their guides. They contract out. Yeah, but Active trains it's all like a big family, and within hours, you're just like you're with with friends. So there's nothing to be afraid of. I would recommend it in a heartbeat. I want to take my daughters there. It's just a beautiful place.
Well, we always want to take the perfect trip, and it sounds like you found the perfect trip in the Dolomites. So I really appreciate Annie's time and telling us about her experience in the Dolomites. If you want to follow Annie, she's at Travel Annie on Instagram. She's an amazing photographer and a true artist, so I encourage you to follow her on Instagram. Again, that's Travel Annie. Annie is so good, in fact, that she actually won a free trip from Active Adventures, and that's how she found them in the first place, was by entering a contest in which she won. And obviously she must be happy with Active because she has now gone on 9 trips with them. And when I reached out to Active and I said, who do you know that's been to the Dolomites that I could talk to? They said, oh man, you got to talk to Annie. She's incredible. And I think you'll agree after listening to her conversation today and how inspirational she is in encouraging us all by the way she encourages herself to get out there and step outside of her comfort zone, to push herself that one little bit further so that she can be the best Annie or the best Kit or whatever the best you that you can be. I've also posted some of Annie's photos on activetraveladventures.com/Dolomites, which is DOLOMITES, or /21 for episode 21, including her contest-winning photo. I've got some videos there. I've got her itinerary and more detailed information than we put forth in this podcast. So be sure to go to activetraveladventures.com/21 or /Dolomites. You can also download the free travel planner if you're not already getting that with our monthly newsletter. And one of my key takeaways from this interview is I love how Annie, once she raised her kids and once they fledged the nest, she actually fledged the nest herself and started traveling the world. She's been to all 7 continents. And after her first adventure trip, she never looked back. They told her to get a pair of hiking boots and break them in before that trip, and she has just hiked the world since then. She's conquered her fear of heights via Ferrata that we talked about today, and now her motto is to face her fears. So she's a real inspiration to all of us. I like, too, that she's always training. I think that that's a great idea. In fact, I've picked up on that and started doing that myself, so that way if an opportunity comes up, I can go right away and not worry about hurting myself like I did last year when I went to Scotland without training and carried too much weight on my back. I like, too, how she says that doing this adventure travel and the slow pace of hiking or whatnot gives you time to think. And I found Annie very insightful about how she pushes herself to find her own limits and how gratifying it is once she achieves her goals. And remember, if I can do it and Annie can do it, you can do it. All in all, a great interview, and I'm very grateful to Annie, and I look forward to seeing you all in 2 weeks. Oh, before I forget, if you haven't done so already, could I ask you to please go to the website, activetraveladventures.com, and on the home page or on the directory page, there is a link to take a survey. It takes 2 to 3 minutes at the most. It's 10 multiple choice questions that will help me to better prepare shows for you. So if you give me a couple of minutes, I can provide much better content for you once I get to know a little bit more about you. It's completely anonymous, but it helps me to gauge future content. I would really appreciate it. Thank you so much. On the webpage, in addition to the survey photos and videos, you'll also find not only the complete itinerary, but also show notes that are time-stamped and the full transcript should you need it. I hope you've enjoyed this tour of the Dolomites, and I look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks when I'll be back with another great adventure. And until then, this is Kit Parks, and Adventure On!